John 19:18 is a continuation of 17, where it says the place of a skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. In verse 18, where they crucified him. That doesn't fit with the added story of the drink, so I can't begin with where they crucified him. Luke, there they crucified him, because it's a similar situation from John. It's the place mentioned. When they were come to the place, which is called Calvary, there they crucified him. So that doesn't fit either, but they crucified him is in both. So I could use both those. Mark, and when they had crucified him, they parted his garments. That could work, except it's as if it's a non-issue just to go to the important part of them parting his garments. When they crucified him, they parted his garments. I know that I kind of did that earlier. When they were come to Calvary, which is to say Hebrew Golgotha, they gave him to drink wine mingled with gall and myrrh. So I kind of breezed past the name of the place to go to the more spoken about issue of the drink. But I don't want to do that here, because this is such a short statement. They crucified him. It's already so short that I don't want to breeze past it with the word when they crucified him, they did this other thing. As if the crucifixion is a non-issue and 3 words can suffice the action. I know we go through his last words and the events of the day, that it got dark. All the other events, they do add to it, but still, this one statement is so short. It's so simplified. I don't want to have when. Matthew is pretty much the only other option. And they crucified him. It's still extremely short, but it doesn't breeze past. It's not mentioning they parted his garments as if that's more important. It does go into that next, and parted his garments, but they're at least mentioned side by side as 2 important events instead of when this happened, this more important thing happened. So I'm just going to go with Matthew. And they crucified him. So that's pretty much the same way it's written in Mark, except for the word when. And I'm just going to leave off when, because it de-emphasizes the crucifixion. So, and from Matthew and Mark, they crucified him from Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. And now all 4, they crucified him. John then goes into the other 2, and 2 other with him on either side 1, and Jesus in the midst. Then the mention of the sign above his head. The Jews complain about it. And then 5 verses later, then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made 4 parts. So that's the parting of his clothing, fulfillment of Psalm 22. Luke 23 has malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. Then Jesus gives his first final statement. Then they parted his raiment. I definitely want to go with the fact that there are 2 others crucified beside him. Mark, they parted his garments. It was the 3rd hour they crucified him. Superscription of his... Okay, so they do have the sign. Okay, they do have the 2 mentioned. With him they crucified 2 thieves, the one on his right hand and the other on his left. So the mention of the 2 crucified around him come later after the sign. Matthew parted his garments. The sign over his head. And the 2 thieves crucified with him, one on his right hand, the other on his left. You know, I know Matthew and Mark agree. But I'm going to save the parting of his garments for after the two are mentioned. I'm going to go with John. They crucified him, and on either side is two others, and the sign above his head. Now I could just wait and save the parting of his garments, put the sign over his head, and then the two thieves. But I don't think I want to do that, because in John it has the sign over his head and then the issue of the high priests and the scribes and the Pharisees complaining about what it says. Because it says Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And they don't want it to say the King. They want it to say, he said, I am King of the Jews. That way it's like a false claim. At least that's what they want his punishment to be. So because it has this interaction with the Jews complaining about the sign, I'm going to have the sign and their complaint all combined. Which means that I have to have the two crucified around him after all this complaint. Or I could have the two crucified around him, then the sign and their complaint. And I think because I want to go with setting up the scenery so that you can get a mental picture, he's crucified, two on his side, and the sign which they complain about. So I'm going to go with John, the two mentioned right now. So I do have they crucified him, and two other with him, on either side one. That's kind of a strange way of wording it. I like the way Luke has it. There they crucified him, and the malefactors, one on the right hand and the other on the left. I think I like that because in Luke it did mention that there were two before, right here. And there were also two other malefactors led with him to be put to death. So now you're continuing. You don't have to just say, and there were two. You would say, the malefactors that were mentioned before. Then were there two thieves crucified with him. So it mentions what their crime was in Matthew. Mark, and with him they crucified two thieves. Since the malefactors is like remembering what they were mentioned before, I really want to have that included and not just combined somehow. But I also want to have the thieves. Then were there two thieves. And then I think I'm going to have comma, the malefactors, comma, as like an insert. By the way, this is who we mentioned before. Mark, and with him they crucified two thieves. Or they crucify. Crucified with him, or with him they crucify. Okay, I need to go with then. And they crucified him. Then, from Matthew. And I need to go with Mark then, with him. Because I don't just want to go, and they crucified him. Then they crucified with him too. That'd be too close together, crucified. So with him is Matthew, Mark, and the malefactors on the right hand and the others on the left. So not with him in Luke. John, and two other with him. So with him is Matthew, Mark, John. two other. On either side one. That's John. Luke, the malefactors. One on the right hand, the other on the left. I think I'm going to do the longer explanation instead of on either side one. One on the right hand, the other on the left. Mark, the one on his right hand and the other on his left. I think I like having his instead of the right and the left. Matthew, one on the right hand, the other on the left. Okay, I'm still going to go with his point of view because he really is the center of attention in this situation. Okay, well, if I'm going to go with his right hand, his left, I'm going to have him be the center of attention. So instead of saying they crucified him, I'll just say there were crucified. Because I want to bring the attention off of the Romans and on to Jesus, because this is his purpose. He is now fulfilling his calling. And were then two thieves were crucified there. Then with him there were, that's what it has to be, there were two thieves. Mark. Just two thieves, not there were. Luke. There. Okay, I can put the there. Matthew and Luke there. There. Were. Just Matthew. Matthew, two thieves crucified. Mark, two thieves crucify. But again, I'm taking off the attention from the Romans, so I'm not going to say they crucify. I'll use crucified. I'll have comma, the malefactors, comma, after the two thieves. And John, just two, not thieves. So two is Matthew, Mark, and John. Thieves, Matthew, Mark. I'm going to go with crucified. Okay, I'm rethinking having with him stated earlier, because now all these added words, there were two thieves, the malefactors, that's a lot of space between the two words crucified. So I don't think it'd be too annoying to have this with him moved after, crucified with him. Then there were two thieves, the malefactors, crucified with him. Small change I'm going to mention. Beginning this sentence with and they crucified him, and then having, then there were two thieves crucified with him, has a strange flow to it. I think it flows a lot better to say, then they crucified him, and there were two thieves crucified with him. I don't think that's too big of a deal, but I did want to mention it. Also, the more glaring change is that the words from Luke, the malefactors, are no longer here. That's because even though they were mentioned earlier in Luke, and there were also two other malefactors led with him to be put to death, I don't think that exact word needs to be mentioned here to remind you who is being spoken of. It's two being crucified with him, so it's not too difficult to figure out. It's the two that were being led out with Jesus to be crucified. And also, malefactor is the same accusation lobbed at Jesus. It just means bad guy. As opposed to a benefactor, it's a person doing bad things. But that word is more described in Matthew and Mark as thieves. That's a specific crime. As opposed to malefactor, they do bad things. So having their crime being more specified as thieves, it makes the additional word repetitive, redundant, and kind of annoying, and draws too much attention to them instead of Jesus. Yes, they're there, but the point is that Jesus is crucified with two other people. Them being thieves is mentioned. That's good enough. It's more clear than malefactor. So the more specific word I'm going to take instead of the less, and leave off that general explanatory word. So now it all reads, then they crucified him, and there were two thieves crucified with him.